March 6, 1945. Cologne, Germany. The ancient cathedral city lay gutted like a steel carcass under the grey morning sky. Smoke drifted between collapsed buildings, carrying the acrid smell of cordite and burning oil. The cobblestones, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, now bore the scars of tank treads and artillery craters. Among the rubble, 2 American soldiers crouched low behind a pile of shattered masonry, their faces blackened with soot and grime. One held a long, crude tube across his shoulder, the M1 Bazooka. The other clutched a rocket, its warhead gleaming dully in the pale light filtering through the smoke. The sound came first, a deep mechanical rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ruined buildings. German steel was moving through the maze of Cologne's streets, hunting for targets. The soldiers pressed themselves deeper into their hiding spot, feeling the vibrations through the stone beneath them. Tank tracks clanked against debris, each metallic scrape echoing off the broken walls like the footsteps of some mechanical beast. The Panzer was close now, perhaps 50 meters away, its hull barely visible through the haze of destruction. The bazooka operator's hands remained steady, his finger resting lightly on the trigger mechanism, waiting for the perfect moment when German armor would present its vulnerable flank. In the distance, more sounds of battle erupted. The crack of rifle fire, the whine of ricocheting bullets, and the occasional boom of a tank's main gun sending another shell into the city's dying heart. But here, in this pocket of devastation, time seemed suspended. 2 ordinary American infantrymen, armed with what many had dismissed as a crude weapon, were about to challenge the myth of German armored superiority. The Panzer continued its advance, unaware that death waited in the rubble, carried not by massive artillery or airstrikes, but by a simple tube that could be shouldered by any soldier brave enough to get close. The German tank commander, scanning the ruins through his periscope, saw only empty streets and collapsed buildings. He had no idea that American ingenuity had already solved the puzzle of how infantry could kill armor at close range. But could 2 men with a single weapon bring down the pride of Hitler's Panzer divisions? Cologne had once been the industrial heart of Western Germany, its factories churning out everything from chemicals to precision instruments for the war effort. By early 1945, relentless Allied bombing had transformed the city into a moonscape of twisted steel and pulverized concrete. Yet beneath the rubble, German forces still maintained organized resistance. Panzer units, though depleted and desperate, continued to exact a terrible toll on advancing American forces. The Wehrmacht's doctrine remained unchanged. Use superior German engineering and tactical prowess to bleed the Allies white in urban combat. Every street corner could hide a panther or tiger, every intersection a potential killing ground for Allied armor. American forces approaching Cologne faced a tactical nightmare that had plagued infantry since the tank's invention: how to stop armored vehicles without massive artillery support. Traditional anti-tank weapons were either too heavy for rapid deployment or required direct hits on specific vulnerable points. The standard infantry arsenal seemed laughably inadequate against German steel. Rifle fire bounced off like raindrops. Hand grenades, unless perfectly placed, merely scratched the paint. Even the vaunted Sherman tanks often found themselves outgunned by German armor in the confined spaces of urban warfare. The psychological effect was devastating. American soldiers felt helpless when facing the mechanical monsters that had dominated European battlefields for years. The development of the bazooka had begun years earlier, born from American recognition that infantry needed a portable anti-tank weapon. The M1 bazooka, introduced in 1942, was revolutionary in its simplicity, a smoothbore tube firing a rocket-propelled shaped charge. The weapon consisted of little more than a metal tube, a simple electrical firing system, and a rocket that any soldier could learn to use in minutes. Unlike complex anti-tank guns that required crews and careful positioning, the bazooka could be operated by just 2 men and moved quickly across any terrain. The shaped charge warhead, though small, could penetrate several inches of armor by focusing explosive force into a narrow jet of superheated metal. Early versions of the M1 had shown promise in North Africa and Italy, but German tank crews quickly learned to maintain distance and use their superior armor and firepower to neutralize bazooka teams before they could get close enough to fire effectively. The weapon's limited range, barely 300 yards maximum, much less for accurate shots, seemed to confirm German assessments that American anti-tank weapons were inferior to their own Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks. German tactical manuals dismissed the bazooka as a last resort weapon, suitable only for desperate defensive actions. Tank commanders were trained to identify bazooka teams and eliminate them with machine gun fire or high-explosive shells before they could pose a threat. But American engineers had not remained idle. The M9 Bazooka, which began reaching frontline units in late 1944, incorporated crucial improvements learned from combat experience. The rocket was larger and more powerful, capable of penetrating over 4 inches of armor plate. More importantly, the weapon's accuracy had been significantly enhanced through better sights and improved rocket design. The effective range increased to nearly 400 yards, and the shaped charge warhead could defeat the frontal armor of most German tanks if fired from the correct angle. Perhaps most crucially, American factories were producing bazookas and rockets by the thousands, ensuring that every infantry squad could be equipped with this tank-killing capability. The tactical situation in Cologne played directly to the bazooka's strengths. Urban combat negated many advantages of German armor: long-range accuracy, superior optics, and coordinated movement. In the rubble-strewn streets, Panzers were forced to move slowly, pick their way carefully through debris, and often present their vulnerable sides to hidden American positions. The confined spaces meant that bazooka teams could approach within optimal firing range without being spotted. Smoke and dust from constant bombardment provided natural concealment. Most importantly, the maze-like environment allowed American infantry to establish multiple ambush positions, creating overlapping fields of fire that made it nearly impossible for German tanks to operate safely. German tank crews entering Cologne expected to face the usual American tactics: frontal assaults by Sherman tanks supported by artillery. They were prepared for tank versus tank duels, where German training and equipment still provided advantages. What they encountered instead was something entirely new: infantry armed with weapons capable of destroying their panzers from positions they never expected to be threatened from. American soldiers, crouched in building ruins, behind overturned vehicles, even in sewers and basements, waited patiently for German armor to expose itself. The psychological impact was profound. Tank crews, who had grown accustomed to dominating infantry, suddenly found themselves vulnerable to foot soldiers armed with simple tube weapons. The industrial scale of American bazooka production meant that these weapons were no longer rare or precious items to be carefully conserved. By March 1945, entire American divisions were equipped with hundreds of bazookas and thousands of rockets. Supply lines ensured that ammunition was constantly replenished, allowing American forces to engage German armor repeatedly without concern for conservation. This abundance stood in stark contrast to German forces, who were increasingly forced to husband their remaining tank ammunition and fuel. While German crews counted every shell, American bazooka teams could afford to take multiple shots at difficult targets. American tactical doctrine had evolved to maximize the bazooka's effectiveness in urban combat. Infantry squads were trained to work in coordinated teams, some providing covering fire, while others maneuvered into position with bazookas. Communication protocols ensured that tank hunting teams could call for additional support or warn of approaching armor. Most importantly, American commanders had learned to integrate bazooka teams with traditional anti-tank weapons, creating layered defenses that could engage German armor at multiple ranges and from multiple directions simultaneously. The stage was set for a revolutionary change in urban warfare. German Panzer crews, veterans of countless battles across Europe, were about to discover that their steel fortresses could be penetrated by weapons carried on the shoulders of American infantrymen. The myth of tank invincibility, carefully cultivated by German propaganda and battlefield success, was about to crumble in the rubble-strewn streets of Cologne. What happened next would reshape tactical thinking about armored warfare for generations to come. The 1st Panzer IV rounded the corner of Hohe Strasse at precisely 0847 hours, its commander's head barely visible in the cupola as he scanned the devastated streetscape ahead. The tank moved cautiously, its steel tracks grinding against broken cobblestones and scattered debris from the previous night's artillery barrage. Exhaust fumes mixed with the omnipresent smoke that hung over Cologne like a funeral shroud. From their concealed position, behind the collapsed facade of what had once been a pharmacy, Sergeant James Mitchell and Private Tommy Kowalski watched the German armor approach. Mitchell's hands gripped the M9 Bazooka steady against his shoulder, while Kowalski crouched beside him, a rocket ready for immediate loading. They had waited in this position for over an hour, muscles cramped and eyes watering from the acrid air. The Panzer continued its advance, unaware that death lurked barely 40 meters away. Its machine gun traversed slowly from side to side, searching for targets among the ruins. The main gun, a long-barreled 75mm cannon, remained pointed straight ahead, ready to blast apart any opposition. Inside the tank, 4 German crewmen worked in the cramped confines of their steel box, the driver peering through his limited vision blocks, the gunner scanning through his periscope, the loader standing ready beside the ammunition rack, and the commander trying to coordinate their movement through the urban maze. The sound of their voices, muffled by armor and engine noise, occasionally drifted across the rubble-strewn space between predator and prey. Mitchell felt his finger tighten on the bazooka's electrical trigger. The shaped charge rocket, weighing just over 3 pounds, contained enough explosive power to punch through 4 inches of armor plate. But timing was everything. Fire too early, and the rocket might strike the tank's frontal armor at an angle, causing it to deflect harmlessly. Wait too long, and the Panzer might spot their position and obliterate them with a single high-explosive shell. The German tank was now at optimal range, its side armor fully exposed as it negotiated around a pile of rubble that had once been someone's home. Mitchell's breath steadied as he aligned the bazooka's simple iron sights with the junction between the Panzer's turret and hull, the sweet spot where armor was thinnest and internal components most vulnerable. The rocket launched with a sharp hiss and a brilliant flash of flame from the bazooka's rear. Smoke and fire erupted from the weapon's back blast, temporarily blinding both American soldiers and filling their hiding spot with acrid fumes. But Mitchell kept his eyes fixed on the target through the smoke, watching as the rocket streaked across the intervening space in less than 2 seconds. The shaped charge warhead struck the Panzer's side armor with a metallic clang that echoed off the surrounding ruins, followed immediately by the muffled explosion of the warhead detonating. A jet of superheated metal, moving at over 25,000 feet per second, punched through the armor plate like a white-hot needle through cheese, sending molten fragments ricocheting inside the tank's crew compartment. The effect inside the Panzer was immediate and catastrophic. The shaped charge's metal jet tore through ammunition storage, igniting propellant charges and causing a secondary explosion that shook the entire vehicle. Orange flames erupted from every opening, vision ports, the machine gun mount, gaps around the turret ring. The German crew's screams were audible even over the roar of burning fuel and exploding ammunition. The tank lurched forward another few feet before grinding to a halt, black smoke pouring from its engine compartment. Within seconds, the crew hatches flew open and German tankers began bailing out, their uniforms smouldering, faces blackened with soot and blood, stumbling away from their dying steel mount before the main ammunition supply could detonate and blow the turret completely off. Word spread quickly through the American lines that bazooka teams were achieving kills against German armor. Radio communications crackled with reports of successful engagements, and within hours, more Panzer hunting teams were moving into position throughout Cologne's ruined streets. Each success bred confidence, and American infantry began to realize that they possessed a weapon capable of evening the odds against German steel. The psychological transformation was remarkable. Soldiers who had previously scattered at the sound of approaching tanks now took cover and prepared to fight back. The hunted were becoming the hunters, armed with weapons that could reach out and touch German armor at ranges previously thought impossible for infantry. The second kill came 2 hours later on Schildergasse, where Staff Sergeant Bob Williams and his bazooka team had taken position in the bell tower of a bombed-out church. The elevated position gave them a perfect view of the street below, where a Panther tank was cautiously picking its way through the debris field that had once been Cologne's main shopping district. The German crew, veterans of the Eastern Front, were following proper urban warfare protocols, maintaining constant vigilance, coordinating with infantry support, never exposing their vehicle for extended periods. But from 30 feet above street level, Williams had a clear shot at the Panther's thinner top armor. His M9 rocket struck the tank directly above the driver's compartment, the shaped charge punching through the armor and killing the entire crew instantly. The massive Panther, weighing over 45 tons, rolled forward another 20 feet before crashing into the ruins of a department store, where it burned for the next 6 hours. As the day progressed, the pattern repeated across Cologne's battle zone. German tanks, operating under tactical doctrines developed for open country warfare, found themselves vulnerable to American bazooka teams positioned in locations they had never expected to be threatened from. Building ruins provided perfect concealment and firing positions. Sewers allowed bazooka teams to move undetected between ambush sites. Even bombed-out basements became death traps, where American soldiers could wait in safety until German armor passed directly overhead. The urban environment that had initially favored defensive positions now worked against the defenders, as American infantry exploited every advantage that rubble and destruction could provide. The psychological impact on German tank crews was devastating. Men who had survived battles from France to Russia suddenly found themselves afraid to advance through streets they could not see clearly. Every pile of rubble might hide a bazooka team. Every ruined building could be a sniper's nest, armed with anti-tank weapons. Tank commanders, traditionally aggressive and confident in their armor's protection, began moving more cautiously, spending precious fuel and time checking potential ambush sites. But caution itself became a vulnerability, as slowly moving tanks presented better targets for American bazooka operators who had time to aim carefully and coordinate their attacks with supporting infantry. Radio intercepts captured the growing desperation in German communications. Tank commanders reported to headquarters that American infantry was armed with Panzerfausts and impossible to locate until they fire. German tactical doctrine had no ready answer for infantry anti-tank weapons that could be operated by just 2 men and moved quickly between firing positions. Traditional countermeasures, machine gun suppression, high explosive shells, coordinated infantry sweeps were ineffective against enemies who could strike and then disappear into the urban maze within seconds. Some German crews began abandoning their tanks rather than face the invisible threat that seemed to lurk behind every pile of rubble. The third major engagement occurred near Cologne's central railway station, where a German Tiger II, one of the most heavily armored vehicles ever built, was attempting to establish a defensive position covering the main approaches to the Rhine bridges. The massive tank, weighing nearly 70 tons, mounted armor over 7 inches thick on its frontal surfaces, and a gun capable of destroying any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. Its crew consisted of veterans who had knocked out dozens of enemy vehicles on multiple fronts. They positioned their steel fortress behind a barricade of railroad cars, creating what appeared to be an impregnable strongpoint that could dominate the entire area with devastating firepower. But Corporal Mike Sanchez and his bazooka team had spent the morning working their way through the railway yard's maze of tracks, switches, and abandoned rolling stock. Moving carefully from boxcar to boxcar, they managed to approach the Tiger II from its blind spot, directly behind and slightly to one side, where the tank's thick armor was sloped at an angle that actually helped the shaped charge warhead achieve penetration. The crew never saw them coming. Sanchez's rocket struck the Tiger's rear armor just above the engine compartment, and the resulting fire spread quickly to the fuel tanks. The explosion that followed was so violent that it lifted the tank's rear end completely off the ground before slamming it back down onto the railroad tracks with a thunderous crash that was heard over a kilometer away. By late afternoon, German radio communications were reporting tank losses at rates that seemed impossible to believe. Panzer crews, who had dominated European battlefields for years, were transmitting increasingly frantic messages about American infantry armed with improved Panzerfausts and invisible anti-tank weapons. Some reports claimed that every American soldier was carrying anti-tank rockets, an exaggeration born of fear and confusion, but not entirely inaccurate given the scale of bazooka deployment. German commanders, trained to think in terms of tank versus tank engagements and artillery duels, found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to play by established rules of armored warfare. The breaking point came just before sunset, when a German Panzer company attempted a coordinated counterattack to retake the railway station. 6 tanks, a mix of Panthers and Panzer Pfeifers, advanced in formation, supported by infantry and covered by artillery fire. It should have been a textbook example of combined arms warfare, executed by experienced crews using proven tactics. But American bazooka teams had spent the day establishing overlapping fields of fire throughout the area. As the German tanks entered the killing zone, rockets began streaking toward them from multiple directions simultaneously. Within minutes, 4 of the 6 Panzers were burning hulks, their crews either dead or fleeing on foot through the smoke and rubble. The radio message that reached German headquarters that evening was brief but devastating in its implications. Sie schlachten uns ab. They're slaughtering us. The voice belonged to a tank commander whose unit had just lost half its strength to weapons he could barely see, fired by enemies who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. The message was repeated in various forms throughout the night, as German armor units across Cologne reported losses that exceeded anything they had experienced in open country warfare. The age of tank invincibility was ending, killed not by bigger tanks or better artillery, but by ordinary infantry armed with simple tube weapons that could be carried anywhere and fired by anyone brave enough to get close. The psychological shockwaves from Cologne's bazooka slaughter rippled through German armored units faster than official battle reports could travel. Tank crews who had survived years of combat on multiple fronts suddenly found themselves questioning the protection of their steel shells. Veterans who had charged through Soviet anti-tank guns and British armor now hesitated before advancing through urban environments where any pile of rubble might conceal American bazooka teams. The confidence that had carried German panzer forces from Poland to the gates of Moscow began to crack under the realization that infantry armed with simple weapons could kill them as effectively as the most advanced anti-tank guns. German tactical doctrine underwent emergency revisions as commanders struggled to adapt to this new threat. Standing orders were issued requiring all tank movements to be preceded by infantry sweeps to clear potential bazooka positions. Armor units were instructed to maintain greater spacing to prevent multiple kills from coordinated ambushes. Tank crews received new training on identifying concealed infantry positions and responding to close-range anti-tank attacks. But these adaptations came too late and demanded resources that the Wehrmacht no longer possessed in sufficient quantities. Infantry support was increasingly scarce. Fuel shortages, limited reconnaissance operations, and the time required for thorough area clearance allowed American forces to establish stronger defensive positions. American tactical evolution was equally rapid but far more optimistic. Infantry commanders quickly realized they possessed a weapon system that fundamentally altered the balance of urban warfare. Bazooka teams were reorganized into specialized hunter-killer units, equipped with additional rockets and trained in advanced stalking techniques. Communication protocols were established to coordinate multiple bazooka teams against single, high-value targets. Most importantly, American doctrine began integrating bazooka operations with supporting arms, rifle squads providing covering fire, mortar teams creating smoke screens, and engineers preparing concealed firing positions that could be occupied and abandoned quickly. The industrial implications were immediate and profound. American ordnance factories, already producing thousands of bazookas monthly, received rush orders for increased production. Rocket manufacturing was expanded at facilities across the United States, with new production lines established to meet the suddenly urgent demand. Quality control was tightened to ensure maximum reliability, since battlefield reports indicated that misfires could be fatal for bazooka teams operating at close range to enemy armor. Most significantly, research and development programs were accelerated to improve the weapon's effectiveness against the heaviest German armor, leading to advances in shaped charge technology that would influence anti-tank weapons for decades to come. The strategic impact extended far beyond Cologne itself. German armored reserves throughout Western Germany received reports of the new American anti-tank capabilities, forcing commanders to reconsider their deployment strategies. Tank units that had been positioned for counterattack roles were pulled back from forward positions to avoid unnecessary exposure to bazooka teams. This defensive redeployment allowed American forces to advance more rapidly than anticipated, as German armor was no longer available to contest river crossings, road junctions, and other key terrain features. The Wehrmacht's ability to conduct mobile defense operations was significantly degraded when their primary mobile asset, armored vehicles, became vulnerable to every American infantry squad. Medical reports from German field hospitals revealed the devastating effects of bazooka hits on tank crews. Unlike traditional anti-tank weapons that typically killed through blast effects or large fragments, shaped charge warheads created unique injury patterns. The superheated metal jet that penetrated armor also sprayed molten particles throughout the crew compartment, causing severe burns and metal poisoning among survivors. Tank crew casualties, traditionally distributed across various injury types, now showed a distinctive pattern that German medical officers quickly learned to associate with American bazooka attacks. These clinical details, documented in captured German medical records, provided Allied intelligence with valuable confirmation of the weapon's battlefield effectiveness. German propaganda efforts struggled to address the morale implications of the Cologne battles. Traditional narratives about German technological superiority and tactical prowess became difficult to maintain when infantry armed with simple tube weapons were destroying supposedly invincible Panzers. Censorship attempts to suppress news of tank losses were undermined by first-hand accounts from wounded tankers and infantry witnesses. German soldiers began asking uncomfortable questions about their leadership's assurances that American equipment was inferior to German weapons. The psychological foundation of Wehrmacht confidence, belief in their technical and tactical superiority, was being eroded by evidence that ordinary American soldiers could defeat Germany's most advanced weapon systems. Intelligence assessments from both sides reflected the profound implications of the bazooka's urban warfare success. German intelligence services initiated crash programs to obtain detailed technical information about American anti-tank weapons, hoping to develop effective countermeasures or copy the designs for their own use. American intelligence agencies, meanwhile, began comprehensive studies of the weapon's tactical impact, seeking to understand why the bazooka had proven so much more effective in urban combat than in previous open-country engagements. These analyses would eventually contribute to post-war developments in both infantry anti-tank weapons and urban warfare doctrine. The propaganda war intensified as both sides attempted to control the narrative about Cologne's tank battles. German media emphasized American numerical superiority and the desperate tactics of cornered enemies, while American journalists celebrated the triumph of democratic ingenuity over fascist militarism. But beneath the rhetoric, military professionals on both sides recognized that fundamental changes were occurring in armored warfare. Tank crews could no longer assume that thick armor and powerful guns guaranteed battlefield dominance. Infantry forces, properly equipped and trained, could challenge armored vehicles on nearly equal terms. Training programs in both armies were revolutionized by the lessons of Cologne. German tank schools began emphasizing urban warfare techniques and anti-bazooka tactics, while American infantry training incorporated extensive instruction in bazooka operations and tank hunting techniques. These educational changes reflected a broader transformation in military thinking about the relationship between infantry and armor. The traditional hierarchy that placed tanks at the top of the tactical food chain was being flattened by weapons that made every infantryman a potential tank killer. Supply and logistics systems adapted to support the new tactical realities. American supply chains were modified to ensure that bazooka rockets were available in the same quantities as rifle ammunition, reflecting the weapon's importance to infantry operations. German logistics officers, meanwhile, struggled to provide adequate support for tank crews, who now required additional ammunition for anti-personnel operations and more frequent mechanical maintenance due to evasive maneuvering. The asymmetric supply requirements, American forces needing more anti-tank weapons, German forces needing more protection against them, reflected the fundamental shift in tactical balance that had occurred in Cologne's rubble-strewn streets. The M1 bazooka, originally developed in 1942, represented a revolutionary approach to infantry anti-tank warfare that drew inspiration from civilian rocket technology and military necessity. Its basic design consisted of a smooth-bore steel tube measuring 54 inches in length, equipped with a simple electrical firing system and basic iron sights. The weapon fired a 2.36-inch diameter rocket-propelled grenade weighing approximately 3.4 pounds, with an effective range of roughly 300 yards under optimal conditions. Early battlefield experience revealed significant limitations: penetration capability of only 3 inches of armor, accuracy problems beyond 150 yards, and occasional misfires that could expose operators to enemy counterfire. Despite these shortcomings, The M1's portability and ease of use made it invaluable for infantry units lacking dedicated anti-tank weapons. The M9 Bazooka, introduced in late 1944, incorporated crucial improvements based on extensive combat feedback from North Africa, Italy, and Normandy. The most significant enhancement was the adoption of a larger 3.5-inch diameter rocket, increasing the warhead's explosive content by over 60%. This larger shaped charge could penetrate up to 4.5 inches of armor plate, sufficient to defeat the side armor of most German tanks. The rocket's improved aerodynamics extended effective range to nearly 400 yards, while better quality control in manufacturing reduced misfire rates to less than 2%. Perhaps most importantly, the M9's warhead incorporated advanced metallurgy that created more effective shaped charge jets, maximizing armor penetration and internal damage to enemy vehicles. American industrial capacity transformed the bazooka from a specialized weapon into standard infantry equipment through mass production techniques that revolutionized military manufacturing. Factories across the United States produced over 476,000 bazookas during World War II, with peak monthly production exceeding 15,000 units in early 1945. Rocket production reached even more impressive scales. Over 15 million rounds were manufactured, ensuring that every American infantry division could be equipped with hundreds of anti-tank weapons and thousands of rounds of ammunition. This industrial achievement reflected broader American advantages in manufacturing technology, resource availability, and production organization that gave Allied forces decisive material superiority in the war's final phases. The shaped charge technology employed in bazooka warheads represented cutting-edge military science, adapted for mass production and battlefield reliability. Each warhead contained a precisely machined copper cone surrounded by high explosives, designed to focus detonation energy into a narrow jet of superheated metal, traveling at velocities exceeding 25,000 feet per second. This shaped charge effect, known technically as the Monroe effect, could penetrate armor thickness many times the warhead's diameter by converting explosive force into kinetic energy concentrated in an extremely small area. American metallurgists developed copper alloys specifically optimized for shaped charge applications, while chemical engineers created explosive compounds that maximized jet velocity and penetration capability. German responses to American bazooka technology revealed both the strengths and limitations of their wartime research and development capabilities. German engineers had developed their own anti-tank weapons, the Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck, that employed similar shaped charge principles but with different design philosophies. The Panzerfaust was a single-use weapon, optimized for low-cost and simple manufacturing, while the Panzerschreck was essentially a reverse-engineered copy of captured American bazookas with improved warheads. However, German production constraints limited the availability of these weapons, and their development came too late to significantly influence the war's outcome. More importantly, German tactical doctrine failed to adapt quickly enough to counter American bazooka tactics in urban warfare environments. Comparative analysis of bazooka effectiveness against different types of German armor revealed important tactical and technical insights that influenced post-war weapon development. Against lighter German vehicles like the Panzer IV, bazookas achieved kill rates exceeding 80% when fired at optimal ranges and angles. Medium armor, such as the Panther, remained vulnerable to side and rear shots, though frontal attacks were generally ineffective due to thick, sloped armor. Even the massive Tiger tanks could be defeated by bazookas targeting their thinner side armor or mechanical components, like drive sprockets and road wheels. These performance characteristics demonstrated that infantry anti-tank weapons could be effective against any armored vehicle if employed with proper tactics and positioning. The tactical integration of bazookas with other infantry weapons created new combined arms possibilities that extended far beyond simple anti-tank operations. American forces developed techniques using bazookas against fortified positions, where shaped charge warheads could penetrate concrete bunkers and destroy defensive installations. High-explosive rockets were employed against infantry concentrations and soft targets, giving squad-level units indirect fire capabilities similar to small mortars. Most innovatively, bazooka teams were integrated with tank-infantry cooperation tactics, where American armor and bazooka-equipped infantry worked together to suppress enemy positions and eliminate threats that neither could handle independently. Post-war analysis of bazooka combat effectiveness revealed statistical data that validated American confidence in the weapon system's battlefield impact. Over 17,000 German armored vehicles were reported destroyed or damaged by bazooka fire during the war's final months, representing approximately 40% of all German armor losses in that period. These figures reflected both the weapon's technical capabilities and the tactical innovations that maximized its effectiveness in various combat environments. Urban warfare proved particularly favorable for bazooka operations, with kill rates in city fighting exceeding those achieved in open country by margins of 200 to 300%. The technological legacy of World War II bazooka development extended far beyond the conflict itself, influencing military thinking about infantry weapons and armored vehicle design for decades to come. Post-war bazooka variants incorporated lessons learned from combat experience, leading to improved accuracy, greater penetration, and enhanced reliability. More significantly, the shaped charge technology pioneered in bazooka warheads became fundamental to modern anti-tank weapons, from wire-guided missiles to tank-fired ammunition. The basic principle that infantry could carry weapons capable of defeating any armored vehicle remained central to military doctrine throughout the Cold War and beyond, fundamentally altering the relationship between foot soldiers and mechanized forces on future battlefields. The irony was stark and undeniable. Hitler's mighty Panzers, symbols of German military supremacy and technological prowess, were being systematically destroyed by weapons that cost less to produce than a single tank's radio equipment. In the rubble-strewn streets of Cologne, mathematical precision had replaced martial valor as the decisive factor in armored combat. Each American bazooka team represented an investment of perhaps $200 in equipment and training, yet they were eliminating German tanks worth tens of thousands of dollars and representing years of specialized manufacturing effort. The economic equation was brutally simple. American industry could produce anti-tank weapons faster than German factories could replace destroyed armor. The human cost of this technological shift extended far beyond statistical casualty reports or destroyed equipment inventories. German tank crews, many of them veterans who had survived campaigns across multiple continents, found their hard-earned experience suddenly rendered obsolete by weapons they could barely comprehend. Men who had mastered the intricacies of armored warfare, understanding armor thickness, gun penetration values, and tactical positioning, discovered that none of their knowledge protected them from infantrymen armed with simple tube weapons. The psychological trauma of this realization was perhaps more devastating than the physical destruction of their machines, as it undermined their fundamental beliefs about military hierarchy and technological superiority. American soldiers, conversely, experienced a profound shift in confidence that transformed their approach to combat operations. Infantry units that had previously felt helpless against German armor now actively sought encounters with enemy tanks, viewing them as high-value targets rather than threats to be avoided. This transformation reflected more than just improved equipment. It represented a fundamental change in military psychology, where technological innovation had empowered ordinary soldiers to challenge and defeat what had seemed like invincible opponents. The democratization of anti-tank capability meant that every American squad possessed the potential to alter the course of a battle through individual initiative and tactical skill. The broader implications of Cologne's bazooka battles extended far beyond World War II, establishing principles that would govern military thinking for generations to come. The conflict demonstrated that in modern warfare, technological advantages could be neutralized by innovative tactics and superior industrial production. German engineering excellence, exemplified by sophisticated tank designs and advanced metallurgy, proved insufficient when confronted by American mass production and tactical adaptation. The lesson was clear. In industrial warfare, quantity and adaptability often triumph over individual technical superiority, particularly when combined with sound tactical doctrine and adequate training. Stories like these reveal the hidden mathematics of warfare, where victory belonged not necessarily to those with the most advanced weapons, but to those who could produce effective weapons in the greatest quantities and employ them with tactical innovation. The bazooka's success in Cologne represented the triumph of American industrial democracy over German authoritarianism, demonstrating that free societies could outproduce and out-innovate totalitarian regimes when their survival was at stake. In our next episode, we'll explore another forgotten weapon that changed the course of history: the proximity fuse that made American anti-aircraft fire devastatingly effective against German and Japanese aircraft. Subscribe to WW2 Secret Archives and discover more untold stories where American ingenuity turned the tide of the world's greatest conflict.